Okay. Well, welcome everybody to Moonee Valley Council's Introduction to Electric Vehicles webinar event, which is being delivered to you as part of Council's free Green Living Workshop program. Before we begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the traditional owners of Moonee Valley land, the Wurundjeri, people of the Kulin Nation, and pay respects to their elders past and present. Council also extends this respect to elders and descendants of other Aboriginal peoples here today. Moonee Valley Council also acknowledges the climate emergency and is delivering this event to prevent the worst impacts of climate change and foster community resilience to climate impacts. My name is Deanna Vidovic and I'm a Sustainability Officer with Moonee Valley City Council. You will be on mute for the session. However, please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. Please use the chat function to also let me know if you're having any technical issues and I will try to address them. The presentation today will go for an hour and we'll stop frequently to answer your questions via the Q&A box, but we've also allocated the last 10 to 15 minutes at the end of this session to address more questions, and hopefully we'll get to them all. If you can't stay for the whole session, we are recording this event and we will be making it available via a link that will be sent to you shortly. If you do not wish to be recorded, please switch off your camera. Our presenter today is Bryce Gayton, and Bryce has been working and writing about electric vehicles since 2008 and currently drives an electric Hyundai Kona. He writes for The Driven, runs an EV adoption support consultancy and is the EV safety trainer / build supervisor for Melbourne University's Faculty of Engineering and IT. So in his spare time, he also writes on EV topics for Renew magazine, and on behalf of Renew presents on EV issues and opportunities to government, business and community groups. On that note, I'd like to welcome Bryce. So over to you, Bryce.
Thank you, Diana, and I'll leave you to admit the next people coming through, so I'll close that window. Yes, welcome all, and hopefully today we'll fill in a few gaps in your knowledge and answer a few questions about EVs. So today I want to cover sort of a bit of EV terminology, so what's new about driving in cars that you need to know now that the Ice Age, the internal combustion engine era, is ending, what's available both here and overseas, and hopefully you won't cry so much anymore about what's available here versus overseas because things are improving, what its benefits are, or what EV benefits are to the environment and for you, and a set of criteria to select basically how, when, and might be worth changing your household over to electric vehicles. So first up, a bit of EV terminology, if I get things moving. We often hear the terms BEV, FEV, HEV, and FSEV thrown around, but this is what they are. A plug-in electric vehicle is either a BEV, a battery electric vehicle, or a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle. The simplest of all these is, in fact, the BEV, where it's just an electric motor, a battery, and through regenerative braking, so when you're slowing down, it turns the motor into a generator and puts some electricity back into the battery, so you get a little bit more range. And that works for the battery electric vehicle. Nice and simple, and these days the batteries are getting big enough and the ranges are getting long enough that I can easily drive Melbourne to Brisbane, Melbourne to Sydney, Canberra, comfortably in my Hyundai Kona. I've done so several times now. Well, I used to before COVID anyway. The plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, similar thing to electric vehicle, except that it also has an internal combustion engine, the ICE, and that gives it a longer range, but has a smaller battery. So often they'll have 30 to 50 kilometre ranges instead of the 300 to 500 that would be seen in a full battery electric. Hybrid electric vehicle is one without a plug and is only refueled by a petrol. It basically uses an electric motor as a generator to save energy whilst braking. So it's a petrol saving feature rather than a natural electric car as such. So I tend not to quite lump them in as electric vehicles, and certainly with the bans coming on the sales of internal combustion vehicles, the hybrid electric vehicle is included. And last but not least, or maybe is least, according to some people, is the fuel cell electric vehicle, sometimes termed the hydrogen car. They're still an electric car, by the way. They don't burn hydrogen in a combustion motor and turn the engine. And they in fact use hydrogen to form basically in a chemical reaction to make electricity, and it drives an electric motor. But the fuel cell where that happens doesn't like increasing and decreasing load suddenly, like acceleration and deceleration. So it actually uses a small battery, like a hybrid or a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, where they use the battery to accelerate or decelerate and take regenerative braking, because you can't make hydrogen in your car either. So that's the basics of it. That image, I hope, sort of explains some of the terms. A bit more terminology coming. What is an EVSE? I've given up trying to say that the AC types are not a charger, because the charger is actually inside your car. So everybody calls them a charger. The DC ones are a charger because the actual AC to DC conversion is done in the big box sitting outside your car. For AC types, you could have the portable one on your far left, and that is actually one that is multi-rate, so you can switch for anything from 1.4 kilowatts right up to 22 kilowatts if your car will take that. Your next one in the middle there on the left is called a BYO lead, EVSE or EV charger, and you have your own lead in your boot, and you just plug into that as a socket. Councils and public chargers public AC chargers tend to use that one because they don't have to maintain the lead, and you look after it yourself, which is not a bad idea. They're a trip hazard, a safety hazard if they're left lying around. And as you can see on the middle one there, the Tesla EVSE is actually what's called a tethered lead EVSE. And that's often, if they have a lead on a public one, people leave them lying all over the place, so they get driven over, which is why in general, the public ones don't have it. But for home use, a tethered lead is much, much, much easier to use. You just unroll it and plug it in rather than having to find the lead out of the boot. And the two on the left, I'll talk a little more later, but they are actually DC fast chargers. The one that looks a bit like it escaped from a science fiction film, looks like a bit like the, I can't remember the name of the film, Lost in Space, that robot is in fact made here in Australia and sold all over the world. One of the big success stories in Australian EVs. Anyway,
Bryce,
yes.
sorry to interrupt. It's Diana. We might be having a little bit of an issue with your sound. Someone's just made a note to say that you sort of fade in and fade out a little bit.
I'll move the microphone up a bit. Is that improving?
I hope so. Well,
usually this is fairly good, so I'm not sure what's happening.
Yeah, I can hear you quite well, but anyway.
I'll move that up a bit, and hopefully I won't mumble.
Okay. Yep. All right.
I'll speak up a bit more clearly.
Getting a few messages to say it's a bit clearer. So, yep. Good. Please, go ahead.
It's one of the disadvantages of Zoom. You tend to start, because you're on your own in a room, you tend to start mumbling because you forget that the other people are out there. Whereas my teaching background, when I'm standing in front of a class or in a lecture theatre, I will tend to sort of shout out and sort of talk to the group. So my apologies to those people who couldn't hear you, and I'll think of myself in the lecture theatre. Okay, next one. I often get questions about what V2X is. Basically, V2G, I'll just move because I've somehow put this box in the wrong spot. V2H is your vehicle to home stuff, and V2G is vehicle to grid. You've often heard these terms and wondered what they might be. V2X is in fact just a generic term for both of them together, and it's done via the DC connector in your car. Now, there's a little trick with the DC connector. Currently, only CHAdeMO, which is the Nissan, and only Nissan still use the CHAdeMO, is the original DC fast charge port, and that's the one shown there with a big round one for DC charging on the left and the AC plug on the right. And they're not approved for use here in Australia, though they are almost, and there's some trials going on. CHAdeMO, however, is on the way out, and actually everybody else uses that one that I put up there. It's called CCS, a combined charging system, and it is basically the plug war is over. CCS has won, and that is basically both the AC at the top and the DC at the bottom in one nice big socket. So CCS is being developed to do V2X, vehicle to whatever, and it's likely 2025 before the V2X systems and hardware is approved for use and available. So there are some stuff that's likely to be approved and used later this year for CHAdeMO, but only CHAdeMO, so only the Nissan Leaf effectively. After that, all the other cars will be coming in, and some of the new cars are actually being announced as having vehicle to grid capacity, and they'll be CCS systems. So that's covering what V2X is. And the other thing is, when it comes to EVs versus petrol cars. How do you charge? The key point here is the refueling paradigm is different. It's a plug and ignore mobile phone model, not a find, stop, and act as a fuel pump attendant. So instead of spending 5 or 10 minutes detouring off your road once a week to find a petrol station, stand there refueling it, stand in the queue to pay for it, I say it takes me 20 seconds to charge my car, because it's 10 seconds when I get home and plug it in, and 10 seconds in the morning to basically walk out and unplug it. So it's a very different paradigm. And part of that paradigm is the next slide, where how fast can I charge? Unlike a petrol station where basically it's one speed fits all, we can now choose the speed and the price that we want. So the price cycle is at our discretion, not at the petrol companies. And I better keep an eye on time. We started at 12:30, so we should be right. And basically you can charge gently from an ordinary power point, or I'll talk about why that's not quite such a good idea in the next slide. Or you can charge, and that next one is a 15 amp outlet, or you can have your own dedicated wall mounted outlet, and they will give you different charging speeds. So, and I'll talk a bit more about the speeds in a moment, but I'll talk about here, if you see maximum kilometers charged per hour is sort of a nice way to look at it. So if you plug in an ordinary power point and you only want to top up 30, 40 kilometers, you'll be comfortably charged in a couple of hours overnight. Although for my Kona, it would take 28 hours to actually charge it fully. A 15 amp outlet, that will give me 24-ish kilometers charged an hour, and that's 18 hours from 0 to 100, which means when I was traveling around Victoria and there were no DC fast chargers around, I could do 300-400 Ks in a day, pull into a caravan park, plug into their caravan 15 amp outlet, and the next morning by 8 o'clock, I was ready to go 100% charged. So basically, when you're touring in an EV before the full DC network is rolled out, caravan parks are your greatest friend for staying anywhere in rural regional areas. After that, your 3-phase or single-phase AC charge you put on the wall. If you're 3-phase house and your car is 3-phase capable, like a Renault Zoe, it'll charge in about 2.5 hours on a 3-phase one. My Kona will charge in about 9 hours. However, my Kona also only does single phase, so yes, I could plug it into a 3-phase one, won't make any difference. It still only charges off 1 phase, as I could say with that note B. DC charging, there's several around. They can be 50 or up to 350 kilowatt charging, which means for my Kona, I can get 260 kilometers charged an hour. So an hour and a quarter-ish, I'll be up to 80%. And if a full charger, because it's only 70 kilowatts as maximum anyway, some of the others are 200, 250. So a Tesla Model 3 will charge in about 20 minutes because they do 250 kilowatt charging. So you just have to get your head around some slightly different numbers and speeds, but once you get it, you'll have a little table like that for your car in your glove box if you're not good at mental arithmetic, and it's pretty straightforward. But it is a different model for charging. It's no longer that one size fits all. But you can also, if you're charging at home, choose your off-peak rates. So it's a lot easier and cheaper. So as I said, your price cycle, instead of petrol being chosen by the petrol stations, is chosen by you. Okay, how fast do I need to charge at home? Well, first up, if you're doing less than 200 kilometers a day, a PowerPoint will do it. However, it costs about $500 installed. It has to be back to the switchboard to do a proper car charging one. I recommend one with a screwed outlet if you're really going to do it. Don't use an ordinary PowerPoint. That's the sort of thing that can happen. Melted plugs, sockets, not a good look. Ordinary PowerPoints were never made for the charging cars. You need something a little bit more dedicated. So one that screws together is quite good, or a dedicated charger like that is a much better idea. And they have really robust plugs. Overnight charge, my Kona will do in 9 hours. And they're 1,500 up installed. Okay, I've babbled for long enough, Diana. Is there any questions coming in on the question Q&A?
No questions at the moment, Bryce. So yeah, feel free to keep going.
No worries. I shall blah, blah, blah away a bit more. Fleet electrification, by the way, is not just cars. And I have to keep reminding people it's not just about electric cars, although I talk mostly about them. Trucks are coming. The one on the top right is basically done here in Australia, in Melbourne. I say not in Melbourne, in Dandenong, and moving out towards South Gippsland soon. That next one is the Tesla truck. They're built and they're in road testing, and the only thing stopping their rollout for sale is Tesla can't build enough batteries because they swallow a lot of batteries, and it's probably a dozen or more cars per truck. So they'd rather sell a dozen cars than a truck at the moment, I think. Electric bicycles, they are everywhere these days. Motorbikes you can buy now. Planes, they are actual trainers flying here in Australia, and you can buy them overseas. There are actually flying cars being experimented with. That thing's called the Black Fly. Have a look at it on the web. It's really interesting to watch. There's a single person, and they are being set up to be autonomous. And the first one, I think, is actually registered for sale as a flying for flying, and will basically can be autonomous. And there's several other bigger companies actually setting up to have autonomous taxi type things. Autonomous forms, that little thing there is a prototype, but it was built here in Victoria, and is being tested around the place. Buses, I think Shenzhen or one of those provinces in China has changed all 10,000 of its bus fleet to full electric buses, and they're getting around the world at the moment. And ferries, believe it or not, that ferry there does a regular run in Northern Europe, Denmark to Sweden, daily run, has about a 40 megawatt hour battery, and has been running for probably 18 months, 2 years now, and there are a number of them being built and on order. So it's not just electric cars, a whole lots of other things. Pretty much all of transport will be electrified very soon. Now, this is the time you may start wanting to create. That is the VW ID3, by the way, been for sale now for 6 months or more in Europe and will not be brought here, sadly. The ID4 is, and these are all the others that are either, a couple of them are here. Most of those are either sold overseas now or will be within the next 12 months. And most of those won't be coming here yet, which is rather sad. The ID4, which is that middle red one, the VW there, will actually be coming here, despite the ID3 not coming here. Next, well, it's not quite as bad as you think. We now have, and I just realized I missed one today and just added it about 5 minutes before the presentation. There's 13 models of electric vehicle for sale here in Australia. I won't dwell on them, but that just gives you an idea of we're starting to get more vehicles available. So, the Teslas, the Jags, there's a couple of Mercedes, and on the next slide, I'll be showing you. Oh, by the way, if people are going, I would have liked to see the price of the Hyundai Ioniq, and I've scooted through the slide. At the end, I have my email address. You can email me and I'll send you a copy of the slide. So if there's anything you want to look at in further detail, feel free to email me. And that email address will be at the end. And Diana, I'll send it through to you as well, the final version. So that's what's available now. Coming up, these will be within the next 12 months available for sale here in Australia. So the Kia e-Niro, I know a lot of people are waiting for that one. It's basically a Hyundai Kona in drag because Kia is owned by Hyundai. So it's the same mechanicals as the Kona, same battery, but a slightly bigger vehicle with a bigger boot. That's probably the biggest, not problem, but it's just the Kona I bought because it's a smaller vehicle, and the compromise you make is it's a relatively small boot. The Kia has a bigger boot and it's just a slightly bigger package. BMW bringing out a couple late this year. The Model Y Tesla is pretty much any time now. England, they've just, with the right-hand drive, they've just opened orders for them, so they can't be far off. It's usually within a few weeks that they've opened them from England to here. Fingers crossed for those people who are waiting on that one. The Mercedes EQS will be coming hopefully early next year. Tesla Roadster it's been much talked about, and it's hopefully late this year. And the EV Auto 2-ton van, that's been brought in by a private importer, and they will be available very soon. I often get questions about the fuel cell EVs like the Toyota Mirai, Hyundai Nexo, Honda Clarity. Renault have in fact announced their master van may be hydrogen option by the end of this year. However, here it will be on 2021 before you could buy one. At the moment, the only one available is the Hyundai Nexo, and that's only for lease. By the way, there's negligible refueling capacity in Australia. I think there's 2 refueling stations in Australia, only one of which is public, although there's 1 or 2 more being built at the moment. And as I keep pointing out, the electrical energy requirement to generate the hydrogen to move, say, 10 kilometres is 3 to 5 times as much as us using the same electricity to charge a battery up. So I often make the joke in my live presentations that who here has seen the film Who Killed the Electric Car? And I say, okay, those of you who are young enough to be alive in 2080, sadly I won't be, but those who are, then I'm willing to bet there'll be a film called Who Killed the Hydrogen Car? Because that could be about the time the hydrogen time will come. At the moment, if you need lots of renewable energy, electrical energy to create the hydrogen, with limited renewable energy at the moment, it's not a good path to be going down when you can already do it with electric cars. Hydrogen has many other purposes and uses that electric batteries may not be quite so suited for, but I don't think cars are it. Okay, secondhand, I'm going to scoot through this bit. There are beginning to be a number available. So the model Teslas have been available. I've just noticed the Tesla Roadster prices are going up secondhand. So if you're going to grab a appreciating classic, now is possibly just a bit late. Model X's, iMeves, their batteries have held up well. The iMeves, the batteries in the early Leafs, by the way, haven't held up well. Looking at about $10,000 to $12,000 for replacing a Gen 1 battery in the early Leafs. The Renault Zoes have just become secondhand now. They just did a run out. Renault no longer selling the Zoe here. There is a newer model Zoe in Europe that has a 50 kilowatt battery and DC fast charge. And we may see that now that Renault has handed over the baton to Iveco, who are now importing Renaults rather than Renault themselves. And there's obviously the Ioniqs and Konas and things like that that are starting to come up secondhand. I've noticed the Konas, as I was looking today checking prices, the Konas for sale secondhand are about the same price I paid for my Kona new nearly 2 years ago. So yes, EVs are very much sought after these days. There are some grey import options, as they're called, and these are listed here, the iMev or Miev Minicab. The Nissan Leaf, the Good Car Company, are doing bulk buys of those, and some people may have heard about those. And you can even get some of the 63 kilowatt hour versions, which isn't yet sold here, although will apparently later be sold here later this year. ENV Wagon is basically a Nissan Leaf in drag, and a number of people have bought them and love them, although they are limited in their range like the early Leafs. For those of you with stout hearts and don't mind tinkering, the Blade Electrons, which are Hyundai converted, were about 50 of them were done here, and the company unfortunately went broke. And yes, until I gave up working on them because they gave me PTSD, I got a reputation being able to fix the things and get them back on the road. But every one of them is different, and you're going to have to be pretty stout of heart to be able to take one of those on. But if you're interested in a DIY project, they're quite good and quite cheap. Okay, any more questions wandering in before I start the next sort of set of slides, Dana?
No, Bryce, not at the moment.
Beautiful. I'm assuming most of you usually leave them to the end, but I thought I'll pop in a few questions.
That's okay.
I'm covering a fair bit of territory, so if you had a few queries along the way.
No,
Okay.
keep going.
Why EVs benefit the environment and you? I'll run through those. One, the environment. There's no tailpipe pollution, so for inner city areas, that's a pretty good thing. Overall emissions, I'll talk a bit more about that in the next slide, but they actually do produce less emissions overall than running on petrol. Negligible emissions of using solar, wind, green power, and definitely oils, brake pads are certainly reduced with regenerative braking, saving lots and lots of effort there. No spark plugs, no oil filters, air filters. Yes, there are some issues around ethical sourcing of the battery minerals, but that applies to just about everything in our lives these days. So I'm not quite sure EVs are particular culprits there. As for you, oh, it's raining outside. Vehicle service costs are definitely much reduced. My Kona costs $165 once a year or 15,000 Ks versus $250 sometimes 6 or 12-month intervals. Electricity is certainly cheaper than petrol. I'll talk about that on the next slide, I think. And if you're running on the right tariff or running off your own panels, it's pretty much effectively free. So a little bit of cost analysis here. Oh, sorry, carbon analysis first. These are the real savings on CO2e or total CO2 greenhouse gas emissions. And these are not, by the way, figures plucked from my head. These are actually using the national greenhouse accounts factors from the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources using their calculation methodology. So yes, there's certain parliamentarians like Craig Kelly who say there's no point driving an EV unless you're in Tasmania and off their grid. Yes, please refer to your own government department. Anyway, so if you're looking here, this is using a 2017 figures. I've just noticed that the 2020 ones have come out. So it's about time for me to update this. I'll do another article for you fairly soon, hopefully. And this will be, I'll leave it to you to work out. But in Tasmania, it's about, what, 1/8 of the carbon emissions off their hydro grid versus a Corolla driving around town or driving around in general. You're looking about half in South Australia. Even Victoria, if you're driving around town, it's still less than driving a Corolla around town. It's only in one scenario in Victoria, which is if you replace it for all your driving, like I have, it's about 5% worse off, but that assumes you're not using solar power or green energy. So it's pretty much a fait accompli. You will produce less emissions, and as the grid greens, the emissions will decrease as well. And the little bit about the costs as well. If you're going to be, and I've sort of not completely rubber numbers here. Some people can get less than 20 cents a kilowatt for an off-peak. I should have probably picked more than 10 litres. I should pick 12 litres per 100 kilometres for the petrol car, because that's the average fuel economy of the current new car sales. As people buy bigger and heavier SUV vehicles, that has actually been going up over the last few years, which is quite sad. So yeah, I use 10 as a nice round number to do the mathematics in my head. So if you're doing 10,000 kilometres, $1.50 a litre, you're going to be spending $1,500 in fuel instead of $266 in electricity if you just charge overnight. So as a round number, when you add in your service savings, you might be looking at saving $1,500 a year for every 10,000 Ks you drive. Again, I don't want to dwell on these slides. If you want to refer to them more, then have a look on the slides when you ask for them. But this is just an idea of when you might think it's worth changing over to an EV. And things like, if you're traveling less than 50 kilometers a day, what's stopping you? Pretty much. And I'll look at the secondhand options as well. Every new EV will be fine here.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Diana, there's a bit of noise in your background, I think.
Okay, yeah.
And if you're traveling 140 Ks, all the new cars will still do it. Even if you're traveling less than 200, the Kangoo might struggle because that's pretty much close to its range, but you can top up charge during the day for a little bit. But the Kangoo currently doesn't, the Kangoo here currently doesn't do DC fast charge, as the Zoe didn't. But the news Kangoo that's just been announced and will be for sale overseas in Europe at the end of the year will actually do DC fast charge and have a bigger battery to boot. And it's just as the distances get longer in your daily travel, then yeah, your options get slightly more limited. And if you've certainly got a budget under 60,000, the MG ZS, which is pretty much the only one, the Ioniq, MG, and the Leaf would all keep under, and the MG ZS is now under 50, so it's 44,000 on the road. If you're looking for a little more detail about this, I've actually written an article for The Driven, that's thedriven.io, in 2019, and it might be just about due for an update with all those extra models coming. Secondhand EVs, this is where I was listing some of the existing ones, some of the grey imports, or some of the existing ones you can buy here. Some of the earlier BMWs will still do. If you're doing less than 50 Ks, they'll pretty much all do it. The Renault Zoe is pretty much the best option there, under 300 Ks. The only detail is it's not an interstate car because it doesn't have DC fast charge. Otherwise, it's a beautiful car. We actually bought one of the ones on run out for my partner, and she's absolutely wrapped with it. She's had it about 6 months now. There are practicalities when you're changing to an EV though, and it's worth having a bit of a think. If you've got a switchboard that's not really up to the deal, it's not the EV's fault, but it will trigger an upgrade. So that sort of switchboard there will need replacing. You simply can't add a new EV to that. And quite often the cable for that sort of switchboard is only a 32 amp cable coming into the house. So easy enough to upgrade to 64 amps, but it will require a new switchboard and it gets a little expensive. There's an article I've written on that for Renew magazine, or for AEVA members, it's issue 231 of the magazine. Do you have somewhere to charge off street? There's lead safety, strata title, homes. There are some issues there. I've done a number of articles there. I should have actually added them all in, but there's a couple on strata title there, and edition 145 for Renew magazine. You do need to select the appropriate tariff, and I've done another article there about that one. If you have what's called a maximum demand tariff, so it's charged according to your maximum usage at any one day, then plugging in during the day when everything else is on may not be a good idea. And some businesses certainly use maximum demand tariffs. So it's got to be really careful if you're charging your fleet at that certain time. So you've got to manage it or change your tariffs, something to watch out for. You may need to buy extra leads adapters. If it's a BYO lead, you'll need one of those leads that I'm showing there. Also, I call that one there, a jerry can in the boot, because it will do anything from 1.4 kilowatts up to 22 kilowatts, depending on what you plug it into. Obviously, 22 kilowatts will need a big 3-phase outlet. I've got one of those, and I have an adapter. I think I've got a picture of it a bit later, and it actually can be plugged in anything from a 10 amp outlet up with the right adapter. There is also another consideration here. When will we have no option but to buy an EV? Some countries are already. So this year, Costa Rica will say no more sales of new ICE cars. Norway is 2025, and they've actually set 2040 for short haul flights as well. Denmark is a whole bunch coming in at 2030. Scotland's 2032. There's a couple there that I've listed. China and France, 2040, though those dates are starting to look like shifting already. The UK, they've already decided 2035, and they're not, to miss the party, they've gone, no, not 25, we'll even look at 2032. I think they've just announced that one, and they're now thinking about moving that to 2030. And if you were following the news last week, there was the Infrastructure Victoria panel. That was 211 average Victorians from all around the state in different demographic groups and suburbs. In fact, I was one of them, as in my private capacity. I volunteered and got accepted. And one of the ones that got a big tick from, because these were voted on by the group, was that we should actually be banning by 2030 the sale of ICE cars here. So we may not have any option, or we'll start importing. Will be the, what do I say, the what's that little country in the Caribbean off America that America hates? Cuba. Yes, we'll become the Cuba of the South Pacific, importing old diesels and repairing them for the next 50 years if we don't do something. If you want to find out more about BEVs and electric vehicles in general, I maintain a set of sheets on the website, and it's BEVs and FEVs. There's a summary page. I update at the start of each month, so the next one's in production at the moment, and I'm adding a whole lot of new vehicles, which is nice. There's a 2-page fact sheet with the same set of headings on each sheet, so you can actually compare the vehicles one against the other. And as the models come out, I write new sheets. I've actually got about 3 to write. It has 2 Mercedes and the Porsche Taycan has snuck up on me, and I've got to actually get around to writing those ones. There's other sources of information in Australia, including The Driven, who I write for. It's an Australian dedicated EV news website, and that's, you can see that one there. Or the Electric Vehicle Council, which is the electric vehicle industry, so the big end of town, but they have some very useful information, model sheets, model information too. And last but not least, if you missed our EV Vision e-conference last year, which nearly killed me, which is I've gone very quiet for the last 4 months since organising that, because it was a very big event, and being all online, it was very hard to share our job. So I ended up doing the vast bulk of organising it, and 4 months of exhaustion, I finally started doing presentations again. So if you still want to see those slides and presentations, you can actually still access over 45 speakers, international speakers from all around the world, and just Delegate Connect there. You can pay $25 to get access to them. And okay, I think I've actually allowed a bit more time than I thought, and we've got about 20 minutes for questions. So Diana,
Terrific,
I probably could have gone a bit slower.
You probably could have, but we've got some questions coming in through thick and fast, actually. So we might just start from the top. Okay, so Alex has asked whether you've heard how the maintenance service is by various manufacturers is like.
Well, I cannot be more high in my praise of Hyundai at the moment. My Kona has had 4 recalls and about to have another one, and they're very forward in actually looking after the customers. So if they've got a problem, they will actually proactively talk to the customer. There was a bit of an issue in an earlier recall when there was a start of the battery fires. All around the world was starting to do recalls and updates to the software, and Australia was a little bit behind, but they've learned to be far more proactive in talking to the customers now. So they're actually about to do a recall on the batteries themselves and replace certain selected ones, and they've set it out saying we will be replacing the batteries in some of the cars. So it's an expensive exercise in looking after the Konas, but they're actually buying reputation in a way, because I cannot have a higher praise of the way they're actually looking after the customer. Renault is going to be interesting in terms of their changing who's looking after bringing the Renaults into Australia. So it'll be interesting. The dealers so far, I've only had a couple of people looking after them, so I haven't actually dealt with them yet. Rosalie's Zoe has 6 months, so it's only a 12-month service schedule, so be interesting to see. I haven't heard anything nasty about that. Nissan were a bit patchy on the first generation Leaf because only certain dealers did it, and I think there's still a learning curve there. But again, electric vehicles are very simple to run and operate and maintain. So generally speaking, it's not hard to look after, and certainly with modern electronics and diagnostics, it's not too hard to find the faults most of the time. I've heard of the odd Zoe that has had difficulties there, but Renault has looked after them.
Okay, thanks, Bryce. Natasha is asking about whether the Kona can tow, and why do you write to be confirmed? Can the upcoming Kia tow?
Yep. Technically, the Kona is not supposed to tow. I wouldn't say it's just not recommended according to Hyundai. So there's various. You are allowed to put a tow bar on a car within certain limitations of the gross vehicle limit. You didn't hear this from me, but my Kona has a tow bar, and because the petrol Kona tow bar bolts straight on. So I actually have a tow bar and tow small trailers around with it. But technically, they say not recommended. So it's one of those things that they have to comply, and there's a whole lot of work to do. And I think for small run vehicles, still not selling a lot of EVs. They don't want to spend the extra money. So there are some that do. The Kangoo does tow, but a fairly low amount. The Jaguar does. The Model X Tesla, the Model 3 Tesla, all have tow ratings.
Okay. Alex is asking, does the charger box need to be under an eave for sun and rain protection?
That's a really good question. Depends on which one you buy. If you buy one with an IP international ingress protection or international protection rating, IP65, that can go out on the wall outside. And the ones that I've had, both have had that, and it's not a problem. If you buy something that's IP54, that sort of needs to be under an eave or in a carport because it's not quite as well weather protected. So it depends on the IP rating. The higher the IP rating, the fewer options you have. There's a lot of IP65 ones around now.
Okay. Amir is asking if there's any differences in insurance costs, and then in addition to that, he asks what would happen to the current fossil fuel cars in Victoria beyond 2030.
Two good questions. One is insurance costs. Yes, they vary heaps. Just ring around. I had quotes for my Kona from $1,500 down to $560. Guess which one I took? It was Shannon's with $1,500 to insure it, and APIA was $560, no hassles. So it just, you got to ring around. Some of them seem to be a bit paranoid about electric cars, and others go, it's just a car. And the second one was what happens to ICE vehicles after 2030. In other countries, there's nothing wrong with keeping them on the road. It's just you can't buy a new one.
Mm-hmm.
So the recommendation that has still got to go, that set of recommendations that went through Infrastructure Victoria were the community panel's responses to a month-long discussion between the members, moderated by an outside body called CAPIA. And they basically voted on a whole lot of recommendations that came up in the discussions, and that's gone back to Infrastructure Victoria to research and say what is feasible, what can be done. One of them was, one of the recommendations that I kept jumping up and down about saying you don't need it was mandate a standard charging plug. And I went, as you saw earlier, the CCS system has won out. So the only reason they're fitting CHAdeMO plugs now is because there's a number of Nissan Leafs around, but even the next Nissan EV will have the CCS system plug on it. So there's no need to mandate a plug because it's now sorted itself out.
Okay. Natasha's asking for any tips on buying secondhand and what to look for.
That's a really good question. And in some ways, it's watch the Driven space because there's some new stuff coming up on the Driven website soon about buying secondhand EVs. So keep an eye out there. And what to watch out for, it's mainly the battery, because the battery is your big component in the car. And the big thing to watch out for with that is degradation, and mainly in leafs, so the early leafs. And there's two ways of checking a leaf, is either the actual dash readouts, and I've actually written an article on this topic for Renew magazine. I can't remember off the top of my head which edition it is, but have a look through the archive if they're a Renew member, and you'll fish that one out. And it will be, you can also run it on an app, which is on your touchpad, mobile phone, that type of thing, and you can delve into the leaf for more data on the battery and what its state of health is. And that type of app is available for the Renault Zoe. It's available for a number of other Holden Volt. The Canine is the one for the iMeave, and there's several others. There's hybrids. There's a I can't think of the name of it off the top of my head, but there's one for them as well. So there's apps you can buy that can delve more deeply into the battery state. And the rest of the car is a car. So brakes, battery, as in an 12-volt battery, wheels, tires, suspension, seats, electrics. They're all the same as an ordinary car. So an ordinary car checker, like our OCV, could check everything but the battery and electric motor. And I'm sure there'll start to be services that people with EV knowledge will start turning up and being able to do the data checking via the apps, to add that to the list of things to check. Does that answer her question?
I hope so. Alex is asking, is it true in the future that batteries can be refilled or replaced? Say you want to keep your car longer term.
Yes. First part of that question is how long do they last, which is 8 to 10 years comfortably, and they're all guaranteed for around 8 years and 70 to 80% capacity remaining at 8 years. So they don't just die at the end of that 8 to 10 years. They're just slowly going down. My Kona, if I lost 20% of the range, I probably wouldn't notice, given I can do 500 plus Ks around town in it. So if I lost 20%, I'd lose 100. So I could still do 400. So I wouldn't be that fast apart from going interstate. I might have to stop an extra time on the way to Sydney. So even after 8 years, I'd still be pretty much okay. So that's the first part. And after that 8 years, those batteries can go into storage systems. And Renault, for instance, are setting up big storage battery systems where they're keeping either batteries that they're manufactured for Zoes as replacements, and they'll be kept nicely charged and gently discharged to be kept in good condition for the next 10 years or more as replacements for existing Zoes. And the old Zoe batteries, when they're replaced, can go into these systems as well, and they will have another 10 years or more as a storage system. So these are megawatt size battery backup systems, grid backup systems. And yes, you can replace them after that. Like Renault Zoes have batteries already manufactured, ready and waiting. Nissan Leaf, you can buy or have installed for around $10,000 a new battery put in the 24 kilowatt hour ones. In Japan, you can buy for $2,600, $2,600 US, I should say. So it's about 4,000 Australian, a remanufactured battery, which is they bring in the old batteries, pull them apart, send off for recycling the dud cells, and then assemble a whole set of good cells and give you for 2,600 US a replacement battery. And there's a company in New Zealand that does battery swaps. So you can put a 40 kilowatt hour battery, for instance, in a 24 kilowatt hour Leaf and get the extra range. So there's all sorts of options. And as the cars get older, there are getting to be more options available. It's just economies of scale. There's not a huge number, especially in Australia and New Zealand, although New Zealand has way more than we do. We had 600 Leafs-ish of the first generation. New Zealand has about 6,500 of that generation at quarter the population. So it gives you an idea of the difference in EV support policies there versus here. I've sort of babbled on about that one, but yes, you can replace batteries and they will keep the car going.
Okay. So Natasha has asked, perhaps you've already answered this, but she asks, how long will a battery last?
I think I've answered that one in the
Yes.
last. I sort of accidentally answered
Yes.
that one as well.
Alex asks, if you have a breakdown, do you have to be towed? And is there a jump start mechanism?
There have been various experiments with bringing out portable batteries, portable generators to EVs and topping them up to get them going, like a little jerry can of petrol. So they will give you half an hour of a charge. It'll, as I said, at 15 amp outlet or a 32 amp EVSE, 32 amp EVSE, half an hour, you'll get about 20 kilometers charge, and it'll get you to the nearest DC fast charge, like the one behind me in that picture. That's actually at Dugeong in New South Wales. That'll get you to the next one. So it's basically like a 4 litre jerry can that they'll bring. But what they find is there's not a lot of those either battery systems or generator systems. You can't have one at every RSEV man or person's car, so there'll only be a few of them. And Murphy's Law says if you want one in Eastern Victoria, the only one available is either in Melbourne or in Western Victoria, things like that. So the longer answer is that it's actually, I think they're finding it cheaper to say, oh, if you run out of electricity, we'll come and collect you on a tray truck and drop you in front of a DC fast charger. So that's part. So that's sort of, yes, you can get a jump start type thing, but I think it works out quicker and cheaper for the auto societies that just pick up their tray truck and plonk in front of the DC fast charge, like the one behind me.
Okay. Another question from Natasha, who's asking, will the government give incentives, do you think?
That was one of the top or not, it was 21 recommendations from the Victorian Community Panel. And that was up around 6 or 5, 6, 7 or 8, somewhere around there. It was to give targeted means tested incentives to Victorians to buy EVs as an equity issue if people obviously can't afford yet to buy EVs because they are more expensive. So there was a recommendation. I suspect Infrastructure Victoria will go away, research it, and come back with methods to do that, and as a way recommendation to go to the Victorian government, and that report will be going in at the middle of this year. But that's just my gut feeling that there will be a recommendation. Whether the government actually takes it up or not is another matter. That's statewide. Federally, pass. Moving right along on that answer. And what was the other part of the question?
Oh, it was just that one part. It's just, will the government give incentives?
Ah, yes. Oh, the other part of my answer is that, yes, I realized there's a second part. I'm going, what was the other part? The answer is that EV prices are coming down and down at a relatively rapid rate. You can now buy an MG ZS, for instance, for $44,000 on the road. By 2024, they're saying they will reach price parity, the first segments of the car market, price parity with internal combustion engine vehicles. And by 2028, all EVs will be price parity or less than the comparable ICE, because in theory, a battery electric car is cheaper to make than an internal combustion engine. So it'll be game over by 2028, because either you can buy an EV, which has a better car to drive and better features than a comparable ICE now, but at a price that is either the same or less than a petrol car, which costs you more to service, costs you more to run, smelly, noisy, vibrates, and doesn't have the instant acceleration of an EV. So whether you need incentives after 2024 is a debatable point, and between now and then, perhaps. That was sort of the nuanced answer to that one.
Well, I think there are no more questions.
Oh, I've actually finished.
Actually, no. So there's just a little bit of feedback, and yes, there's a message from Tom Danby to everyone that, and I was going to mention it at the close of this session, that Moonee Valley Sustainability Community Group, they are holding an EV festival this Saturday, the 17th of April, at 78 St Leonard's Road in Ascot Vale off Union Road. And at their festival, they'll have some cars on display, and so you can talk to, so people interested in attending can actually talk to the owners of those cars. I think there'll also be some e-bikes, and so yeah, that I think starts at about 10 a.m. and I think goes until mid-afternoonish. There is more information about this particular event on the Moonee Valley on the Moonee Valley website on the events page. So if you're interested in more of the details about that and what they're covering, just yeah, head on to that. Just Google it and you'll find more information. Oh, actually, I've just been notified that Bill Shorten is actually opening the event at 11 a.m. So there you go. And there's another question from Alex. So are we right to just ask you a few more questions, Bryce?
Yes, please do.
Okay. So Alex has a question. He says he has a house battery. And he continues to say, when can I run my house? Sorry, when could I run my house from my new car battery? Is there a car coming that is best suited for this? And are there firms who know about this in Melbourne?
At the moment, you can't. Well, if you had a Nissan Leaf and one of the prototype systems, you could run it off the car now, but it would cost you about $15,000 in alterations of the house electrics versus having a dedicated house battery system anyway, which is a lot cheaper. By 2025, you'll be able to do V2X stuff with the CCS port car. So all the cars by then, they're certainly announcing some of them already coming with that availability. By 2025, they should all have the capacity, and the grid and the communication standards will all be sorted out. So that's basically the issue, is the cars talking to the grid in order to do this, and the house electrics as well. So there's a whole lot of communication protocols to be agreed and sorted. So that's why the delays. The CHAdeMO system was developed by TEPCO, the Tokyo Electric Power Company, in conjunction with Toyota and not Toyota, Nissan and Mitsubishi, to basically provide power in the event of tsunamis, earthquakes, all that type of thing, because they are rather prone to natural disasters there. So they were really keen to have that vehicle to X capacity. So CHAdeMO has always had that system. That was part of the design, and you can buy boxes in Japan that will plug into the car and provide you a 240 volt power, depending on which grid system they've got over there, either 240 volt on the east side or the 110, 120 volt on the west side, or vice versa. But yes, you can plug in and charge or run electricity systems there or through the grid. They have that system and a capacity. It's not really approved from many other places in the world, and certainly not Australia yet. They're being trialled. So the main thing is when CCS has its full capacity for vehicle to grid, vehicle to X, you ought to start buying systems in about 4 or 5 years' time.
Okay. Looks like there are no further questions, but just a little bit of feedback from Val, who says, thank you so much. It was very interesting and informative, and we'll seriously look at making the move to an EV within the next 12 months. So thanks for that.
Congratulations, Val, and thank you for the feedback.
And another thanks from Amir, and thank you from Alex, and thanks from Tom. So getting lots of feedback. Just a reminder to everyone before you log off, you'll be receiving an email following this session. It's just a survey that it will take you 2 minutes to complete. It just helps us to improve the workshop offerings that we make available during the year. So if you have a few minutes to spare, we would love you to just complete that feedback form, and any other feedback on the workshop in particular too. On that note, so we have finished early. How's that, Bryce?
Good. And if anybody's after those slides, you've got the email address at the bottom there, which has been up for most of the question time.
Yeah. And I've also recorded the session too, so the plan is to also, we'll be uploading the recording to the Moonee Valley YouTube channel, so it'll also be available there.
Good, and I'll remember to go a little bit slower because I added a few extra items to this particular presentation. I thought I better go a bit quicker, and I think I sped up a little too much. my apologies for zooming a little bit there.
No, that's okay. All right. Well, thanks again, Bryce. It was a great session, really informative, and I think we'll have you know, more people definitely considering purchasing EVs in the next year or two.
Excellent. And enjoy your EV journeys. Enjoy the EV green. Oh, while I think of it, the latest Renew has come out, and there's actually 2 articles on EVs that we've got in there. One is on EV etiquette, which I call EV etiquette, on just the new paradigm of EVs and EV charging and what to do. And the other one is on when you're selecting cars, there's a various standards that cars are measured to give their range, and they're really annoying in the way that they can be quite different to each other. So I've explained in an article there the differences and which ones to use. So that would really help you if you're looking for a genuine estimate of the car's range when you're buying it, rather than what the government figures or the Green Vehicle Guide figures are, because it's still using a very old, outdated system.
Terrific. All right. Well, once again, thanks everyone for attending. It was great to see you all. All the best. Thanks again, Bryce, for a great session.
You're welcome, Diana. Thanks for running it. It's been good to talk.
Thank you again. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.